world froze a long time ago. So long ago that I can't remember the warmth of the sun. The planet grew hotter as our fuel was burned. One day, it started to snow, and it never stopped.
That was the Canadian movie, The Colony. Remember that, the Canadian, in quotation marks. Now, I'm gonna show you an article about Arctic ice cap from dailymail.co.uk. It says, and now it's global cooling, return of Arctic ice cap as it grows by 29% in a year. 533,000 more square miles of ocean covered with ice than in 2012. And here it is, NASA's satellite image comparison for August 2012 and 2013, which proves an unbroken ice sheet more than half size of the Europe already stretches from the Canadian, again inside double quote, to Russia's northern shores. So are these two Canadian, one in the movie The Colony and another in reality, related? Is there a group of insane cabals that are trying to harm our people and our planet intentionally? These are the questions that we need to investigate in order to find the right answer. So our lawsuit campaign needs your support and donations to do this investigation. In my view, this is a real threat and we need to stop this as soon as possible. Please go to my website at geoengineeringlawsuit.ca and help to save our planet. So by now, we have proven that actually our planet is cooling down. To elaborate more on this, I would like to introduce you to Mr. John Casey of spaceandscience.net. So Casey is a former White House Space Program Advisor, consultant to NASA headquarters, and space shuttle engineer. He is one of America's most successful climate change researchers and climate prediction experts. So Casey is best known as the leading advocate in the US for a national and international plan to prepare for the next climate change, which he has predicted to be one of a dangerous called climate era. He's also the editor of the Global Climate Status Report and is the author of the internationally acclaimed climate book called Sun. So Casey is currently the president of a climate research company, the Space and Science Research Corporation, SSRC, in Orlando, Florida. In March 2013, he was named America's Best Climate Prediction Expert by watchdogwire.com. His website is www.spaceandscience.net. So Casey has made an assessment of the Working Group 1 IPCC Fifth Assessment Report, Climate Change 2013, the Physical Science Basis Summary for Policymakers. In general assessment section of this report says the UN-IPCC AR5, the Physical Science Basis Summary for Policymakers, or in short, Summary, published on September 27, 2013, like many of its predecessors, continues to make a wide range of assertions and conclusions about the influence of mankind's effects on the Earth's climate without the solid science needed to validate them. Further, in its efforts to demonstrate that mankind's CO2 emissions have had a material effect on the Earth's climate variations, the UN-IPCC in the summary report has flagrantly and intentionally 1. Failed to explain its 23-year-long track record of proven inability to accurately predict climate change. 2. Not publicly and fully disclosed inherent flaws in its methodology. 3. Kept silent on other climate theories and models that are far superior to those used by UN-IPCC. 4. Ignored or covered up critical facts pertaining to the true status of the Earth's climate. 5. Dismissed or hid what the most likely future of the Earth's climate will be, i.e. decades of record cold weather. 6. Failed to alert the world community and help it prepare for the imminent danger of the coming cold climate period. In taking these last two actions, the UN and its UN-IPCC has put a large portion of the world's citizens at risk from the ill effects arising from this next climate change. This summary and future portions of AR5, based on the science contained in the summary, should be discarded. Given the host of significant errors, flaws in judgment, and simply bad science found in the summary, it should not be considered as a worthwhile scientific document for any policymaker interested in understanding the full range of causes and effects of climate change and what the next climate era will be like. The summary also provides sufficient evidence to conclude that there may have been serious scientific misconduct and breach of professional ethics by the UN-IPCC and the summary's authors. 2. Selected specific concerns. Some of the main points of the SSRC review of the just released summary are as follows. A. Global warming, the primary threat of mankind's alleged influence on the climate, has ended. Yet, the UN-IPCC has completely ignored this major historic climate event. All global temperature indices from the primary US government and UN sources of global temperature data and trends show that there has been no effective growth in the Earth's temperatures for 16 years. Additionally, 2 global climate parameters, atmospheric and oceanic temperatures, have been in steep decline for 7 and 10 years respectively. Yet they are discussed little to not at all in the summary. The summary's attempt to account for these astounding revelations in direct contravention of the UN's primary alleged cause of climate change, i.e. mankind's CO2 emissions, are shockingly inadequate. It should be noted that under the physical science and predictions stated to be 95% accurate in prior UN-IPCC climate reports, this extended lack of global warming, much less actual global cooling, is an impossibility given the unaltered growth in global CO2 during the same period. To now brush aside this climatic 800-pound gorilla in the room as a random case of decadal and interannual variability represents transparently bad science and gross misconduct on the part of the UN-IPCC. This example of manifest deception goes to the heart of this organization's long-established inability to produce trustworthy science devoid of bias. B. The UN-IPCC, in an example of unqualified scientific incompetence and misconduct, has covered up the beginning of a new, potentially dangerous cold climate period. The era of relatively continuous growth in global temperatures since the 1830s has ended with the start of a new global cooling era that likely began during the 2003 to 2007 timeframe. This significant new development in the Earth's climate history unbelievably goes unmentioned in the summary. The UN-IPCC summary covers up this critical and all-important measurement of the status of the Earth's climate. According to many climate researchers, internationally recognized climate prediction experts and science organizations, this new cold climate may cause substantial global crop losses, social upheaval, and extended suffering to the world's citizens. The summary fails to mention even the prospect for this new climate change, much less the advent of this new climate. The summary makes no attempt to alert the world's people of the need to prepare for the possibility of a new difficult cold period, and in so doing commits one of the most serious violations of professional scientific conduct in the history of the United Nations, if not the world. This is another major breach of ethical scientific behavior on the part of the UN-IPCC, demonstrating a lack of even minimal levels of scientific reliability and ethical conduct required by any professional science entity. Even if the predicted cold era does not arrive exactly when and to the degree expected, the wealth of evidence is overwhelming based on proven very high reliability climate models found outside the UN that the new cold era has already begun. This is backed up by at least 10 years of declining global temperatures and other solid indicators of ongoing global cooling. Out of a sense of reasonable precaution and humanitarian concerns alone, this situation mandates that the UN-IPCC come clean about this phenomena and explain how it will closely monitor this development. Yet, incredulously, the summary completely hides this possibly calamitous next change in the Earth's climate from governments and the world's citizens. The magnitude of these glaring failures described in A and B above cannot be overstated. They are sufficient to classify the AR5 summary for policymakers and following AR5 reports as being highly unreliable and without scientific merit at the outset. Further, the egregious nature of these failings in the summary may constitute a gross breach of scientific ethics, warranting sanctions against the UN-IPCC and the authors of the summary. As a minimum, there should be an immediate halt to all UN-IPCC climate report development. This SSRC assessment further implies that use of this UN-IPCC summary by any authoritative or deliberative body, educator, or government official for policy development or planning or instructional purposes may be considered fraudulent by an independent investigative body and therefore actionable. Business and financial entities that also use the summary and its signs may also be liable for the use of what the SSRC has only partially described in this assessment as among worst available signs on the subject of climate change. Wow, I'm really stunned, and thank you very much for this fantastic assessment, Mr. Casey. God bless you. I'm not gonna actually read all the assessment. I will provide the link for this great assessment so you could go and download for yourself. Please make it viral. I just want to go to the end and read the last pages. The SSRC evaluated the 19 highlighted claims or climate predictions found within the summary and classified them according to the following criteria. 1. Misleading, incomplete, or inaccurate, noted as M. 2. Patently false or highly unlikely, noted as F. 3. Accurate or likely accurate, noted as A. Of the 19 major claims about the causes and effects of climate change or predictions of our next important climate events, the SSRC assessed them as follows. A. M. Category claims 5. B. F. Category claims 14. C. A. Category claims none. This remarkably poor performance represents a profound indictment of the summary and warrants it being categorized as a completely unusable reference for climate science and totally unacceptable as a suitable document for policymakers. Geoengineering. The mere mention in the summary of proposed geoengineering approaches to counter climate change is deeply disconcerting. The UN-IPCC has shown through over 20 years of research that it is essentially ineffective, unreliable, and potentially untrustworthy. Any attempts, therefore, by the UN or any other government program using UN-IPCC science to mitigate global climate change direction should be immediately terminated. The SSRC believes using UN-IPCC methods and GHG science as basis for deciding how and when to conduct climate manipulation may result in significant, harmful consequences to humans and the environment on a global scale. Such efforts may also result in an unacceptably large waste of resources even for small climate modifications on a regional basis. Regardless, any organization like the UN-IPCC with a historically proven lack of understanding as to how the climate operates now, has operated in the past, and will operate in the future should be the last organization anyone should seek out for advice on climate alternation, much less be allowed to actually conduct such. So by now we have proved that there is a threat of an ice age and global warming is a scam, and that IPCC's report in Climate Change 2013 is fraudulent based on expert advice, Mr. Casey. Now let's see what David Keith has to say in regards to stratospheric aerosol geoengineering.
I guess the thing I haven't said about this is it is absurdly cheap. It's conceivable that, say, using the sulfates method or this method I've come up with, you could create an ice age at a cost of 0.001% of GDP.
But let me correct you, Mr. Keith. We have already started creating ice age. Here it is the proof one more time. Arctic ice cap grows 29% in a year. So isn't this a proof that stratospheric aerosol geoengineering has already started and is the cause of this increase of the ice in Arctic? What about Arctic ice, Mr. Keith?
Here's some data from actually just 10 days ago, which shows this year's minimum of the Arctic sea ice, and it's the lowest by far. And the rate at which the Arctic sea ice is going away is a lot quicker than models.
Oops, sorry, Mr. Keith. You are late. We already have proved you wrong. Okay, so what do you think about climate geoengineering and the use of aluminum oxide in geoengineering?
There's no question that large-scale climate engineering is untested and dangerous. We've mostly thought about sulfur, and there's a lot of good reasons to think about sulfur because sulfur is what nature does, and there are very good reasons to think we would like to start very slowly if we ever wanted to do this and do something that was an analog to nature because we have some idea what the downsides of what nature does are. Nevertheless, there might be some good reasons to think about alumina. It turns out, first of all, there's been a lot of work on the environmental consequences of alumina in the stratosphere because it's in shuttle exhausts. There's a bunch of paper companies that look at the radiative and ozone-destroying properties of alumina in the stratosphere, and those make you think it might be useful. The big deal really is that alumina has 4 times the volumetric radiative forcing for small particles as does sulfur. And that means you have 4 times less surface area for the same radiative forcing. And this is a much bigger deal. You have roughly 16 times less the coagulation rate. And that's the thing that really drives removal. So you could get away, we think, with much smaller mass fluxes. But we haven't run those studies yet, so that might be wrong. The little picture is from a nanofabrication study, which shows you can make very high quality, and do this in just a jet in a very simple way, make high quality alumina particles just by spraying alumina vapor out, which oxidizes. So it's certainly in principle possible to do that. There's a big literature that's already looked at that.
So are you having fun with this hazardous geoengineering?
And by the way, it's not really a moral hazard. It's more like free riding on our grandkids.
So the question is, are you going to let them have a free ride on your grandkids? If not, please go to my website www.geoengineeringlawsuit.ca, sponsor, support, and donate to prevent this from happening. Now, I'm gonna open another discussion here. I would like to explain about UVB and UVC radiations and their effect on human health. Then I will discuss about geoengineering and its adverse effect on ozone layer and human. So let's go for it. According to World Health Organization, as sunlight passes through the atmosphere, all UVC and approximately 90% of UVB radiation is absorbed by ozone, water vapor, oxygen, and carbon dioxide. Please remember this carbon dioxide because I'm going to come back to it later in this discussion. So we know now that carbon dioxide actually can absorb UVB radiation. And if we scroll down the same page, under ozone depletion and UV related health effects, it states computational models predict that a 10% decrease in stratospheric ozone could cause an additional 300,000 non-melanoma and 4,500 melanoma skin cancers, and between 1.6 and 1.75 million more cases of cataracts worldwide every year. Let's go to UV health effects page. Under health effects of UV radiation, it states prolonged human exposure to solar UV radiation may result in acute and chronic health effects on the skin, eye, and immune system. In the most serious cases, skin cancer and cataracts can occur. Let's see what U.S. Environmental Protection Agency provides us with. UVB is a kind of ultraviolet light from the sun and sun lamps that has several harmful effects. UVB is particularly effective at damaging DNA. It's a cause of melanoma and other types of skin cancer. It has also been linked to damage to some materials, crops, and marine organisms. UVC is extremely dangerous. Now, let's have a look at the 2013 Southern Hemisphere ozone hole area provided by the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. The vertical scale is the ozone hole area in million square kilometers, and the horizontal line is the months, and graph colors represents the ozone hole area for respective year based on the legend at the bottom of the picture. The red curve shows 21 million square kilometers ozone hole in September 2013. That is close to North America's area. So you now have an idea how large the ozone hole can get. So now we know how radiation can harm life on Earth and how big it can get. This is the UVI index for typical summer midday in North America provided by the Environment Canada. As you can see, UVI index for Grand Canyon area is 11, which is extreme. Washington DC 9, very high. Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal, Halifax, Calgary, Whistler, British Columbia 8. St. John's, Vancouver, Victoria, Edmonton, Winnipeg 7. Yellowknife, call it 5. North Pole 2. Please remember the numbers because I'm gonna get back to them later. Now, let's have a look at the recommended sun protection scheme based on the UVI index rates provided by World Health Organization. If UVI is between 1 and 2, you can safely stay outside. If UVI is between 3 to 7, seek shade during midday hours, slip on a shirt, slap on a sunscreen, slap on a hat. If UVI is between 8 to 10 or above 11, Avoid being outside during midday hours. Make sure you seek shade. Shirt, sunscreen, and hat are a must. As you can see, we are being bombarded by harmful radiation from the sky. And if you go back to the UVI indexes for the cities that I provided you with, you will notice how dangerous situation can get in September. But the issue is that ozone loss can happen at any time, not just in September. Before I provide you with an evidence about ozone loss in March, I need to explain that ozone thickness is measured in Dobson unit. Each 100 Dobson unit equals to 1 millimeter. To demonstrate this, let's have a look at the NASA's page about Dobson. The Dobson unit is the most common unit for measuring ozone concentration. 1 Dobson unit is the number of the molecules of ozone that would be required to create a layer of pure ozone 0.01 millimeters thick at a temperature of 0 degrees Celsius and a pressure of 1 atmosphere, the air pressure at the surface of the Earth. The average amount of ozone in the atmosphere is roughly 300 Dobson units, equivalent to a layer 3 millimeters or 0.12 inches thick, the height of 2 pennies stacked together. What scientists call the Antarctic ozone hole is an area where the ozone concentration drops to an average of about 100 Dobson units. 100 Dobson units of ozone would form a layer only 1 millimeter thick if it were compressed into a single layer about the height of a dime. Now, with the information in hand, let's see how much ozone loss occurred between March 2010 and March 2011. This is the NASA's image. We have a legend at the bottom of the picture which shows the thickness of ozone from purple 110 Dobson units to red 550 Dobson units. So there are a lot of areas with high ozone thickness in March 2010. Let's see what we have in March 2011. In this NASA's picture, we can see big amount of ozone loss, which in fact is horrible. Now let's find out what is causing this ozone loss. In September 2013, Dan Wigington published an article titled Geoengineering is Destroying the Ozone Layer. He did a test for UV levels with the assistance of a 40-year environmental veteran, 20 years government experience, and 20 years as a private consultant. The result follows. According to agencies like WHO and a long list of other recognized government sources of UV information like NOAA, no more than 5% of the total UV reaching the surface of the Earth should be UVB. The other 95% should be UVA. These agencies go on to state that UVC should be 0. What has our testing shown? UVB, the most lethal form of UV radiation, has now escalated to almost 70% of the total UV reaching the surface of our planet. At least this is the case in Northern California. This can only mean that the total ultraviolet exposure has also escalated sharply, making overall UVB levels worse still. In addition, our testing has consistently shown significant levels of UVC which used to be filtered out by the ozone layer some 100,000 feet up in our atmosphere. So basically Dan's findings proves that ozone loss still is occurring. So what's the cause? Here it is, what he states. Geoengineering aerosols destroy the ozone layer. This is not speculation, it is a fact. There is a mountain of science data that confirms the ozone decimating effect of sunlight reflecting particulates in the upper atmosphere. As geoengineering climate modeler Ken Caldera warned after crunching the numbers for Dr. Edward Teller's aerosol sunscreen, the resulting rapid cooling of the stratosphere causes the formation of huge ice clouds that attract and concentrate ozone-destroying chemicals. This actually has been confirmed by David Keith in an interview with Spiegel. Here it is what he says. Spiegel, whoever injects sulfur into the stratosphere will put heavy risks on health and environment. This doesn't frighten you? Keith: no doubt there are considerable risks. Eventually, the sulfur will settle down into the lower atmosphere, and then there's the ozone loss risk. Here I'm gonna provide you with two more scientific articles backing Dane Wigington's finding in terms of geoengineering destroying the ozone layer. First scientific article is from U.S. National Library of Medicine and National Institutes of Health. The sensitivity of polar ozone depletion to proposed geoengineering schemes by Helms S., Mueller R., Salavich R. Source: National Center for Atmospheric Research. Some part of abstract. The continuous injection of sulfur into the stratosphere has been suggested as a geoengineering scheme to counteract global warming. An injection of sulfur large enough to compensate for surface warming caused by the doubling of atmospheric CO2 would strongly increase the extent of Arctic ozone depletion during the present century for cold winters and would cause a considerable delay between 30 and 70 years in the expected recovery of the Antarctic ozone hole. The second evidence which proves geoengineering destroys ozone layer is an environmental research letter which is part of the Focus on Climate Geoengineering International Intervention in the Climate System. Environmental research letters, a collection of research articles invited by David Keith, published on IOP Science. It's titled The Impact of Geoengineering Aerosols on Stratospheric Temperature and Ozone by P. Heckendorn et al. As a potential interim measure to avoid extreme temperature increase, it has been suggested that Earth's albedo be increased by artificially enhancing stratospheric sulfate aerosols. I'm not going to read all, so I'm going to go to the last part, which says, furthermore, their, meaning large aerosol particles, furthermore, their sedimentation results in a nonlinear relationship between stratospheric aerosol burden and annual injection, leading to a reduction of the targeted cooling. More importantly, the sedimenting particles heat the tropical cold point tropopause, and hence the stratospheric entry mixing ratio of H2O increases. Therefore, geoengineering by means of sulfate aerosols is predicted to accelerate the hydroxyl catalyzed ozone destruction cycles and cause a significant depletion of the ozone layer, even though future halogen concentrations will be significantly reduced. So by now, with scientific evidence, we have proved geoengineering is destroying the ozone layer, no question, and that David Keith also agrees with it. Now, back to my earlier discussion about the fact that carbon dioxide can absorb the UVB radiation. I must say that I'm not a scientist, but common sense here states that if carbon dioxide can absorb the UV radiation, why would they want to remove carbon dioxide from stratosphere? Maybe later I will come back to this, but if you have any idea, please share. But let's have a look at what company David Keith is running. It's carbonengineering.com. Ta-da! It's sponsored by Bill Gates and Murray Edwards. And here it is, their vision and business strategy. I'm not gonna read all again. So what they are doing here, capturing atmospheric, not geologic CO2 and integrating it into liquid fuel production. There we go. I guess there are some oil cartels involved in this as well. So as we can see, there is conflict of interest in here as well. But to really get the right answer to this, we need to do investigation. If you would like to stop this, please go to my website at www.geoengineeringlawsuit.ca. Sponsor, donate, and support, and let's do stop this, please. Now, I would like to bring your attention to horrible side effect of geoengineering. Listen to David Keith.
I think it's useful. So I'm only going to talk about solar radiative management or solar geoengineering. And I believe it's useful to think about these things as really two pretty different questions. And for now, I'm just going to plunge right into the science, not talking at all about why you do this or what the larger kind of governance questions. One question is how you would engineer a given radiative force. How well you could engineer it, what the risks and side effects of engineering that radiative forcing are. So that's essentially one part of the problem is making the radiative forcing in some way. And the other part of the problem is understanding how the climate responds. So in general, if we're making a shortwave radiative forcing, which was what most of us have been thinking about because it was the easiest thing, but Truda is thinking of something different, which is much cleverer. But in general, if you're thinking about a long shortwave radiative forcing of reducing the insulation effectively, it's clear that cannot exactly compensate for the effect CO2. Indeed, it obviously isn't going to in any way compensate for the geochemical effects of CO2, like, say, ocean acidification. But the question is how good a job you can do compensating the climate change that comes from CO2. And the answer, I think, is actually surprising to me anyway. It's been very surprising how good it is. So I divide things into thinking about the risks and the efficacy. And the risks I happen to have listed are for stratospheric sulfates, but there's lots of other technology. But the risks to me, in the way I'm thinking about it, are the things that are kind of the direct side effects of the way you do, the particular way you might do the radiative forcing. So if you put sulfate aerosols in the stratosphere, for example, some of them are going to rain down the troposphere, and they're going to add to air pollution and kill people. And in fact, myself and Steve Barrett at MIT are calculating how many people will be killed.
I'm speechless. David Keith even excited about estimating how many people will be killed as the result of his sulfate aerosol geoengineering. I will leave the judgment to you.
Okay, so again, I interrupt you slightly there. How does it work? How many planes are we talking about here? How do you do this?
So let's say you wanted to stop it warming in 2020. You'd start with a fleet of just 2 or 3 kind of modified business jets.
What kind of like a G6?
Yeah, like a G650.
Like a G6.
That's
like
it.
A G6.
And you'd put, say, 20,000 tons of sulfuric acid into the stratosphere every year. And each year you have to put a little more. And this doesn't, in the long run, mean that you can forget about cutting emissions. We will need to rein in emissions.
No, we'll get to it eventually, yeah.
But it does.
But in the meantime, we're shrouding the earth in sulfuric acid.
So people are terrified about talking about this because they're scared that it will prevent us cutting emissions.
Right, and also that it's sulfuric acid.
They're
bearing the lead. Is there any possible way this could come back to bite us in the ass? Blanketing the earth in sulfuric acid, because I'm all for it. This is the all-chocolate dinner. I still get to have my CO2, and I just need to spray sulfuric acid.
Right.
All over the earth.
Right question, but we put 50 million tons of sulfuric acid in the air now as pollution, and it kills 1 million people a year worldwide.
I'm just holding back my anger here. Do you consent to this? Are you prepared? You or your family might be one of the victims of this assault on our people and our planet. Isn't this called genocide? They are explicitly talking about killing 1 million people in a year. How dare they can, and nobody can touch them? We need to stop this insanity. I'm asking you to go to my website www.geoengineeringlawsuit.ca right now. Sponsor, donate, support before it is too late. This is just the tip of the iceberg. I demonstrated to you that there is a threat of an ice age as well. If you don't believe it, be my guest. Watch this and have fun.
Is anyone else alive?
Define their life. My God. They slaughtered everybody for food. It's the hunger. Just drove them mad. There's nothing human left.
And they're coming here.